When I started building my place, I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone, honestly, but especially not to Brenda Cross and her tight little kingdom over at the Cypress Bluffs HOA. I didn't care about their resale values, their curb appeal, or what they thought about my foundation being rooted deeper than most people's patience. I just knew one thing. I had seen what wind can do when it gets angry. 30 years of flying cargo jets over the Gulf, constantly skirting the edges of tropical depressions and hurricanes, taught me an intimate respect for Mother Nature's tantrums. I was done with the skies, and I had zero intention of letting a storm flatten me in retirement. The land here, just outside of Cypress Bluffs, was cheap, suspiciously cheap, to be honest. 1.8 acres of beautiful, storm-worn Louisiana scrub, where their perfectly spaced pastel boxes ended and my world began. The county line, my protection, slithered right through that cypress woods, and I made damn sure every deed, every survey, every zoning record proved I was on the right side of it. The house, which I nicknamed the Anchor, went up low and tight, half sunk into the earth with walls thick enough to stop a truck, bunker-grade concrete, steel storm shutters, and specialized hurricane glass. The sub-foundation was anchored deep, deeper than anyone on that whole coast thought necessary. My shed held backup fuel. The water tank had its own UV system. And the generator. Oh, she purred like a cat on bourbon, ready for anything. Independent, quiet, resilient, just like I wanted to be. And that, of course, was the problem. Independence doesn't sit well with the HOA crowd. They started knocking not long after I moved in. Polite at first, brochures in hand. Join the community, they said. Be part of something bigger. As if matching mailboxes made people care about each other. I declined, kindly at first. Then with a cease and desist letter from my attorney, Rick, after they tried to file a parcel annexation with the parish zoning board. That stunt cost them a small fortune in legal fees, round one mine. But they just kept trying. A year later, someone mysteriously updated the HOA boundary map to include my land. Cute trick. Unfortunately for them, I had the original plate registered and notarized. The court laughed them out the door. The last time they brought bodies, a full-on community action day, with folding tables and flyers, trying to rally my non-existent neighbors to sign a petition forcing me in. They didn't get 10 feet past the tree line before my no trespassing sign, and the sight of me in camo with a chainsaw stopped the whole operation cold. They packed up in record time. I finally got a court ruling that Cypress Bluffs and its representatives were permanently prohibited from contacting, approaching, or attempting to incorporate me or my land into their jurisdiction. I framed that ruling and hung it in the shed, right below the bourbon shelf. After that, peace held for a while. I kept to myself, added a few raised garden beds, ignored the tight little SUVs that idled at the edge of my fence to take pictures of the bunker house. They just couldn't understand why anyone would go to so much trouble. Why build down into the earth, in a coastal parish where people seemed to believe optimism was stronger than the wind? I didn't explain. You can't explain the storm to people who've only known blue skies. And then the wind came. They called it Hurricane Zeta, a beautiful, soft-sounding name for something that ripped rooftops off like paper napkins. The weather alerts lit up like Christmas on meth. Mandatory evacuation notices, storm surge maps, flood projections like biblical doom. I checked the generator, battened down the last steel storm shutters, brought in the tools and the 2 rescue cats, and then I waited. You don't fight a storm like Zeta, you brace for it. You breathe through it. And you hope to hell the calculations you made when you poured the concrete were right. When it hit, it sounded like God had decided to start over from scratch. The world outside disappeared, trees groaning, rain horizontal, the sound of debris dragging across the roof like fingernails. For a moment, I remembered being in the cockpit during extreme turbulence over open water, that same gut-level helplessness. Then I took a sip of coffee and went back to my book. That's what the Anchor was built for. It was the kind of storm that didn't just tear through buildings and roads. It cracked things open, reputations, assumptions, boundaries. It was the kind of storm that left people looking for someone to blame. And somehow, I was about to become the perfect target. I didn't open the main door until the second morning. The wind had stopped hours before, but I wasn't in a rush to see the wreckage. When I finally unlatched the storm door and stepped out, the silence was worse than the noise had been. The landscape looked like it had been clawed apart by giants. Debris covered everything. Shingles, twisted lawn chairs, and a small boat sitting in the middle of my gravel drive. No water in sight. The smell was rot, seawater, and wet insulation. I took a walk towards Cypress Bluffs, against my better judgment. I didn't want to see it, but I knew I should. The closer I got, the worse it looked. Dozens of houses had taken direct hits. 3 were gone entirely, just slabs and twisted pipes where homes used to be. I found survivors, some dazed, some bleeding, all of them looking like they'd seen something worse than weather. I spent the rest of that day doing what needed to be done, helping dig a woman out from under her porch steps, carrying an elderly man to a makeshift shelter, and giving up my only backup generator to a guy with 2 toddlers and a diabetic wife. Not because I liked the HOA, but because nobody deserves to suffer like that. I didn't see Brenda. Not then. The 3rd day after the storm, the damn mail came. Yeah, that's how you know civilization's trying to reboot. I found the envelope taped to my gate, laminated like a diploma, legal letterhead, and a seal. At first, I thought it was another passive-aggressive flyer about my lawn being disruptive to the neighborhood aesthetic. But then I saw the amount. $10,184,233. I read it again. The number didn't change. The letter claimed I was liable for communal restoration of Cypress Bluffs, infrastructure, landscaping, housing recovery, because my home remained entirely unscathed during the event, and I had refused to participate in collective stormproofing measures. Then came the real kicker. Your anomalous immunity from environmental damage raises valid concerns of intentional exposure deflection or non-participatory safeguarding behavior, which may be considered legally actionable under both civil and moral obligation frameworks. They were accusing me, in official language, of somehow directing a hurricane away from my house and into theirs. It was so far beyond absurd. My house hadn't even lost a window, and that was my crime. I scanned the letter and sent it to Rick, my attorney. He called me back, laughing so hard I thought he might stroke out. "Miles," he wheezed, "that's not a lawsuit. That's an acid trip on stationery." Still, I could hear the warning in his voice. If they're serious, this is going to get ugly. That night, I saw the first post. Someone from Cypress Bluffs had uploaded a drone shot, a panorama of the neighborhood in ruins, with one tiny island of safety dead center, my place. Underneath, a caption in bold white text. Coincidence? The likes were climbing. So were the shares. I tried to ignore it, but then I started seeing it everywhere. Local Facebook groups, Reddit threads, even a write-up in the Bayou Breeze. How did one house survive untouched? Could design alone explain it? Or was there something deliberate at play? That was the tone. Not outright accusations, just enough speculation to light a fire under a traumatized community looking for answers, or better yet, a target. One thread had a photo of me carrying that wounded man from the rubble with the caption, "Odd that he was ready to help so fast," almost like he knew. Within a week, I went from lucky survivor to suspicious anomaly. Then came the court summons. An official complaint filed by the Cypress Bluffs HOA citing willful avoidance of community disaster protocols, possible use of unlicensed weather-resistant technology, and my personal favorite, moral failure to align with collective burden-sharing ethics. Apparently, not getting destroyed was now unethical. I took the summons straight to Rick. He just looked at me and said, "This isn't about the money, Miles. They're setting you up to take the fall. They lost control of everything. The homes, the narrative, the people. Now they're trying to claw it back through you." That night, I poured myself a tall glass of whiskey and stood by the window, watching the shadows ripple across my quiet yard. Then I opened my laptop and started digging. If they wanted a fight, they were going to get one. Rick filed a formal cease and desist and prepped a countersuit. Meanwhile, I started digging through local property records, FEMA reports, and anything public I could find about Cypress Bluffs. The deeper I went, the more things smelled like mildew in a locked attic. For starters, the HOA had filed proof of insurance with the parish after the storm, documents that looked official, but they were fake. I cross-referenced policy numbers with the state insurance database and came up empty. Rick brought in a contact from FEMA who confirmed it. Cypress Bluffs had no valid disaster coverage. What they did have was a stack of fraudulent insurance certificates handed out to homeowners over the past 3 years. All those families were paying monthly for protection that never existed. They were blaming me while their own HOA had pocketed the money and left them naked to the storm. That was the first break. The second came in the form of a manila folder left at my gate, sealed with blue painter's tape. No note, no signature, just a flash drive and a typed message. If you want the truth, look inside. I can't keep doing this. I scanned the drive and opened it. Internal HOA emails, financial spreadsheets, meeting transcripts marked confidential. There were records of transfers from the HOA Emergency Reserve Fund to individual personal accounts, disguised as consulting fees, routed through crypto exchanges just months before Zeta hit. But the worst was the strategic memo labeled Phase 3 Consolidation Plan. In cold corporate language, it described a program to absorb adjacent properties through legislative pressure, zoning adjustments, and negative incentive deployment. Translation: force out the holdouts. People like me. My parcel was circled on a digital map labeled High Priority Resistance Zone. The next day, I got a knock on the door. Not press, not law enforcement, but a tired man in his late 50s with a look that said he'd had enough of pretending. Donnie was his name. He was treasurer on the HOA board until last week. He handed me a second flash drive. I can't be seen here, Miles. I already know I'm screwed. But after the storm, after seeing what they let happen, I couldn't live with it. Why me? I asked. He hesitated. Because you were the target. You weren't just outside the HOA. You were the symbol of what they couldn't control. He left before I could ask more. That night, Rick and I sat in my shed with laptops and printouts covering every flat surface. This wasn't just personal anymore. It was structural. Fraud, misappropriation, conspiracy, and they wanted me out because I proved it was possible to live outside their control. We weren't just going to defend ourselves. We were going to burn it down. Courtrooms always smell the same: dust, disinfectant, and the anxiety of people who know they're lying. We walked in through the side door. Cypress Bluffs had sent their legal crew, 3 attorneys in matching suits and whiter-than-thou confidence. Brenda wasn't in the room yet, but I could feel her coming like humidity before a thunderclap. This was only the preliminary hearing, but the room was packed with HOA members. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, opened the session with a weary sigh. Rick stood like it was opening night on Broadway. He laid out the timeline: the storm, the absurd $10 million demand, the claims about deflecting wind. The courtroom chuckled. Then he dropped the first folder: certified engineering reports signed off by FEMA confirming that the anchor was built to exceed hurricane resistance standards. Fully permitted, fully legal, independently inspected. Next folder: the 3-year-old court order barring the HOA from contacting me. Then came the financial reports. Rick didn't even dramatize it. He just read from the printouts. HOA Reserve Fund Q4 of last year. Over $2.4 million withdrawn through unauthorized transfers disguised as crypto investments, consulting fees, and temporary offshore insurance holding structures. Gasps. Audible gasps. I saw at least one man in the back mouth. What the hell? Rick held up a USB stick. These are internal emails, spreadsheets, and a strategic document labeled Phase 3 Consolidation Plan, which includes plans to force adjacent landowners into the HOA through pressure tactics, media framing, and targeted legal intimidation. Mr. Wallner was specifically named as a priority removal target. That's when Brenda Cross walked in. She was dressed for pity, beige, no makeup, hair slightly mussed, like she'd been too devastated to care. She took a seat behind her lawyers and tried to act small. It didn't work, because then Rick played the tape, a recording from Donnie's drive. Brenda's voice, unmistakable, recorded during a private call with another board member. I don't care if the whole coast washes away as long as my house sells first. Let the wind do the heavy lifting. And Wallner? Don't worry. We'll bury him in paperwork. Let the press eat him alive. Dead silence. Then a ripple. Murmurs. Someone cursed under their breath. The judge banged her gavel once. Order. She spoke slowly, deliberately. The court finds the Cypress Bluffs HOA has no legal jurisdiction over Mr. Wallner's property, has violated an active court injunction, and has presented an action based on frivolous and malicious grounds. Furthermore, the court recognizes preliminary evidence of financial misconduct and defamation. She turned to me. Mr. Wallner, your counterclaim is accepted. A separate referral is being made to the district attorney's office regarding the HOA's financial practices. I didn't react. Not in the room. But I saw Brenda's face. Not anger. Not panic. Just that flicker of realization. The moment someone knows the story they've been writing just got set on fire. As we left the building, a swarm of journalists descended. Rick took point. I said nothing, just kept walking. The official letter came 4 weeks after the hearing. Plain envelope, county seal, HOA, Cypress Bluffs Incorporated, dissolved. It was oddly anticlimactic. No parade, no champagne. Just a quiet declaration that the monster was finally dead. The news traveled fast. Trucks showed up at the HOA's community center, county officials, evidence bags in hand. They wheeled out filing cabinets and hard drives. Later that afternoon, Brenda's face hit the local news. She'd been arrested in Denver, booked under suspicion of wire fraud, conspiracy, and misappropriation of funds. The anchor said she'd sold her house preemptively, knowing the storm was coming. The buyer, apparently, was her sister under a different name. Cute. The fallout was nuclear. The same families who had glared at me in court, 18 of them, filed civil suits against Brenda personally when they found out the insurance policies were fake. I didn't say a word, didn't post, didn't crow, but I did make one change. I had a sign made. Custom metal, industrial grade, big letters. I bolted it right onto the front gate. Stop. Private property. Not a member of any HOA. Trespassers will be photographed, reported, and publicly mocked. The last part was a joke. Sort of. Rick called the day the bank wired the settlement. $2 million and change. Well earned, he said, and with interest. I used most of it to install a reinforced greenhouse and rework the solar array. Might as well lean into the apocalypse. The only visitor I ever entertained was Donnie, the former treasurer. He showed up one evening, weeks after the dust had settled, looking cleaner, less haunted. He handed me a small wooden box. Inside was the original HOA charter, signed years ago, back when Cypress Bluffs was just a hopeful idea. I thought you should have this, he said. You're the only one who beat them without becoming them. Later, I burned the contents in the wood stove and poured a double. She was younger than I expected. The reporter, maybe 30, tin blazer, smart eyes, voice like she practiced it in the mirror. She knocked politely, didn't barge in. That already earned her a few points. I know you've turned down every request, she said, but I'm not here for a scandal. I'm here for the truth. Normally, I'd send someone like her packing, but maybe it was the way she said truth, like it still mattered. We sat out back on the porch. The new solar array buzzed softly above us. She asked about the storm. She asked about the HOA. I told her they'd made their own mess, and I just refused to be part of it. Then she asked the question they all ask in the end. How did your house survive? I looked at her for a second, not suspiciously, just thoughtfully. You really want to know? I said. She nodded. I stood, walked over to the far post of the porch, and pointed at the foundation slab. Thick concrete, steel braced, and sunk 4 feet into the ground. I pointed to the storm shutters, still spotless after the worst hurricane in 3 decades. I didn't build to impress neighbors, I said. I built to outlive their mistakes. She scribbled something in her notebook, then looked up. So, you really think it was just preparation? Not luck, not divine protection. I leaned on the railing. The breeze kicked up, pushing a few pine needles across the deck. I didn't summon the storm, I said. I just knew it was coming. She was quiet for a moment, then nodded once, professionally. That's going in the article. I didn't mind. That was the last interview I ever gave. I got the piece I always wanted. Now, I just look out at the cypress woods, listening to the generator hum, feeling the solid concrete under my feet, and I remember that sometimes the only way to beat a bully is to be stronger, quieter, and better prepared than they could ever imagine. Now, I want to hear from you. Was Miles right to completely isolate himself from the community, even when they were asking for help? Or did his extreme preparation justify his refusal to adhere to collective rules? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Like, subscribe, and thanks for listening to my story.